Well, hello out there again, my fellow backyard stargazers, and welcome to another live episode of At the Eyepiece. Yep, tonight we are broadcasting live. We are going to share some views of some globular clusters mostly. I got a different camera setting here, so we'll be able to go ahead, hopefully, and be able to see the core of these globular clusters without having the exposure necessarily blow them out, and also pick up the outer stars as well. So you can kind of see here from, where's the camera? That image there, that's a bit off. Right over here, we have, of course, a globular cluster right up here, live up on the screen. This is Messier 3. Now, right above here, you'll see the relevant information about M3 from our planetarium app called Sky Safari 5 Pro, which I absolutely love to use. So right now, we are looking at a globular cluster and I will flip back to our Sky Safari app here. So let's get rid of our image view just for a moment so that we can go ahead and show about where we are looking in the night sky. We are faced pretty much due west. And if you look up at the night sky there, probably a good, 60 degrees, 57 degrees above the western horizon, the brightest star that you can go ahead and see is going to be Arcturus. Now, our M3 isn't that far from Arcturus, so if you go ahead to the northwest there from Arcturus, do a little bit of star hopping, you should be able to see M3. Now, this should be an object that you'll be able to pick up also in binoculars if you're viewing from a decently dark sky, suburban or urban environment. Probably not city, but just kind of keep that in mind. So that is about where we are looking. We are in the constellation, let's see here, let's make sure that we are on M3. And we are, yes, we are in the constellation Canes of Navici. And we are looking at this beautiful globular cluster. So I'm going to pull up some information here on screen for you. I will go back over to our live image. This is our live image. Now, I'm not currently taking exposures. I took maybe 6 or so of these, and I'm putting them up on the screen here for you. So hopefully you'll be able to pick that up. And it's actually 6 degrees northeast of Beta Berenices, which I believe Beta is maybe that star right there. So if we are looking back on our application, our Sky Safari app, what it's saying is that it's approximately 6 degrees to the northeast of that star in Coma Berenices, as well as, I would guess, if that is 6 degrees, it's probably about 8 degrees from Arcturus in that location. So let's go back to our M3 here. Discovered by Charles Messier in 1764. And it is a distance of 33,900 light years away. Now, you might recall, if you've seen some of my previous At the Eyepiece shows, you will notice or you'll hear, specifically when we're talking about galaxies, we're talking many light years away. We're talking usually millions of light years away. Now we're kind of more in our own galaxy with these globular clusters. That's why we're at closer, much closer values at 33,900 light years. And let's see. Usually like to go ahead and pick up some other relevant information here for you. 8 billion years old is the rough estimate. And a lot of times I like to see how many stars that they try to have here. Well, it's estimated to be 245,000 solar masses. Now, again, this one is pretty straightforward for you to see with binoculars. Let's go back to our live image. Make sure I'm still guiding. Yes, we are. Now, there are different classes of globular clusters. I don't have my reference up here, but what makes globulars interesting, and that we will probably go ahead and see a variety tonight, is that some have a very dense formation of stars and others are very loose. And I believe the classification is 1 through 15. And forgive me, I don't know which one is the tightest condensation and which one would be looser, meaning is it 1 or is it 15 at the loosest. But I can probably actually look that up now that I'm thinking about it here. See if we can go ahead and just do a quick lookup here for that. Let you enjoy the view here while I'm getting that information. It is okay, very good. It's the Shapley-Sawyer concentration class for globular clusters, and it's actually 1 through 12, not 1 through 15. 15 being the loosest, meaning very little, actually, if at all, concentration towards the center of this mass of stars. So 1 being the highest concentration towards the core, and 12 being the least concentration. That is the Shapley-Sawyer concentration classification system for globular clusters. So let's go back to our view here. Now, this is not the most famous globular clusters in the Northern Hemisphere. Probably that's going to fall to an object that we will probably go ahead and catch here, which is the Great Hercules cluster, M13. And I'm just doing a quick look here around our evening sky. M13 is almost, well, it's practically right above me at my local time in my local sky right now, which is about almost 10 p.m. So it's almost at what is called the zenith. Let's go back to our Sky Safari app here, and I'll show you what I mean. So this imaginary line is what's called the Meridian. And it's just a line, think of it, that splits the sky in half from north to south. Zenith is a point that is almost directly overhead. It is overhead. And so you can see the Hercules cluster, the Hercules constellation there, and M13, or the Hercules cluster, is this object right above. Now again, if you had a pair of binoculars and you were outside perhaps right now or whenever you can get out, and you were to look up at about 10 p.m. local time, just pretty much right above you, you should be able to find Hercules. Now, of course, that does depend upon your general latitude, where you are in the world, basically. I'm about 36 degrees latitude, if I'm not mistaken. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, so let's go back to our Globular Cluster M3 once again. Let's bring it on up here. And in my Sky Safari app, I only have globular clusters currently selected or able to be selected. And we have a few in our general vicinity. Some of these are going to be Messier objects, which is by far the most used list of objects for amateur astronomers. And others are going to be NGC, or New General Catalog. And even others may be what's called Palomar, which I believe is a reference to a Palomar telescope that did basically a globular cluster survey. And some of those are pretty dim as well. But let's go ahead now and let's move on from M3. Let's go actually, let's go down to M53 next. So coming up right here in about a few seconds will be M53 Globular Cluster in constellation Coma Berenices as well. Now this one's very, very close to Diadem, which is one of the stars here. Let's go ahead over to our app and show you what I'm talking about. So we are the kind of bluish greenish box there is M3. That's where the telescope is currently pointed. So we're going further down. Now I guess that's probably close to 10 degrees from M3 towards the western horizon. You're going to find Diadem there. Makes up one of the three main stars in Coma Berenices, and M53 should be in the field of view, at least if you're looking at that with a pair of binoculars. So let's scoot on down there and see what we got. Now I'm going to continue to do a 15-second exposure here, just to see what we're coming up with here with these globular clusters. I'm going to go ahead and start my guiding here real quick. And let's go ahead and get going. I would like to say, if by chance you are watching this live, I do apologize. I'm usually very late at getting over to the channel and checking any chat room or messages. So just bear with me, please. I got a lot going on to try to bring the episode up and live. So bear with me there. So what did I say? M53. I don't know why I typed M15 there. Let's go with that, and let's go ahead and make sure that we are guiding our telescope. And now we are going to go ahead and start the exposure. So in about 6 seconds, we should have M53 up on our screen, if everything went according to plan. And there it is, just slightly off center, but close enough. There is M53. So let's make some little adjustments here to just bring this one up a little bit better in our view. I don't like the backgrounds generally very, very dark, so that's just personal preference for me. I'm going to brighten it up without over brightening, and we'll leave it at about that, and we'll let this kind of what's called stack. And of course I'm not having the image window up, so there is M53 for you that are watching. In fact, I should probably turn more this way so that I can keep a track of things. All right, so if you look right above here where we are talking, you will see the information relevant to M53 if you want to read that along. We are still in the constellation Coma Berenices, which is still pretty much due west if you were to go outside. And right now we are probably 40 degrees above the horizon looking at M53. Okay, it's about 42 degrees above the horizon. And it was discovered independently 2 years later by Charles Messier in 1777. First discovered 1775 by Johann Albert Bode. And there is our M53. Now we'll point out something that you might notice the stars on the image further to the lower left. They look a little out of focus. That's just some issues that I'm having with what we call the focal reducer, adding some probably some coma in there to that image. So just wanted to point that out to you. They don't usually look like that. Look at that, but that's a real nice image of M53 here. go back to our Sky Safari app because I always like to go ahead and show you where you can later on find these objects for yourself at the eyepiece yourself. So again, we are facing pretty much due west. We are looking up at about 40 degrees, and if you were to put your fist out and put the bottom of your fist right at the horizon to the top portion of your thumb, that's about 10 degrees, and you can go ahead and count the degrees up that way. I generally find that rather helpful. And if you were to swing down, find the brightest star, Arcturus, and find the smaller star here, Diadem, which is one of the stars in the constellation Coma Berenices, which is not really an exciting constellation from the standpoint of how many stars you have there, 3 main stars. But you'll be easily able to find M53 right there. Now you might notice that there is another globular cluster. We will go to that next. This one is a new general catalog, or NGC 5053. But we will enjoy M53 here for a bit longer. Let's bring that up on our screen, and there we are. So this is about as close to a live astronomical experience that you can get, other than, of course, being out underneath of the stars and looking up, or looking through an eyepiece of a telescope yourself. Instead of using a glass eyepiece, we are using an electronic eyepiece, basically, or a camera with some special software. In particular, we're using our equipment here is a Celestron C8. By the way, we do have it on the bottom left-hand portion of our screen. We usually put the object that we are viewing. Then you will see C8, which stands for Celestron 8-inch. F3.8 stands for the focal ratio of the telescope. Higher that number, the more magnified, smaller field of view that you're going to have. The lower generally is the better for astronomical imaging purposes and doing electronically assisted observing like we are doing. And next up is the camera type that we are using. We are using Starlight Express Lodestar X2. Now this is actually a guide camera, but it does a phenomenal job for electronically assisted observing. When you're using it with this software, also, well, kind of released yet by Starlight Express, but it was written by Paul Shears out of the UK, and it is called Starlight Live. So if you're interested in finding out more information on that camera, just head on over to Starlight Express and you can go ahead and look up some information. Now they do have another camera that is specifically geared towards electronically assisted observing or electronically assisted astronomy, whatever you prefer. That is the Ultra Star, and that usually comes in 2 flavors, color or monochrome. Now you'll notice here we are not using a color camera. It's just what I have. I prefer monochrome for myself, but I do realize that if I'm going to be doing this more often, I know that you generally like color. So we'll get a color camera as soon as that opportunity can present itself to us. So enjoy the view while we have it. The Ultra Star uses the same software, Starlight Express Starlight Live by Paul Shears. And it gives you a little bit wider field of view because the physical chip is larger. All right, so let's click on M53 here so that you can read the information here on M53 right above me while you are enjoying the live view. See how many stacks we have, by the way, of this, because I might want to just pause it. Yeah, we are at 28 stacks so far. So I'm going to just simply stop the camera exposure and leave the image up. And just save a nice little picture of this for our observing logs. It's always good to keep an observing log. And there we go. And there's really no reason to have my mug up here on the screen any longer. I always like to go ahead and start off to say hello and let you put a face behind who's running the equipment, I guess. So let me go ahead and turn that off for now, and I'll pop on before we end the show. And I do also generally like to point out, I do apologize for any of the ambient noise that you may hear. We are in an observatory of sorts. What I mean, it's a 10 by, what is this? 10 by 16 observatory with an adjacent, what's it, 6 by 8 roll-off roof area for our telescope. So next to me is the air conditioner because it can get quite hot. I'm broadcasting from Middle Tennessee, so humidity can get quite high. So that's why you are having the noise going in the background. A little bit of music here, ambient noise. Looking up some other objects for you. Which is going to be NGC 53. So say goodbye to M53 and hello to NGC 5053 in just one moment. Show you where that is here in relationship to where we are going, because it's really just field of view over basically from M53. remember, the Shapley Sawyer concentration classes, the 1 through 12 for globular clusters, see if you can pick up the differences of their concentrations or their central concentration. Remember, 1 being the highest level of concentration towards the center, and 12 being almost no concentration towards the center at all. So see if you can pick up any subtle differences between any of the globular clusters that we are going to view tonight. All right. Now, I have a feeling that we are going to have to make just a little bit of an adjustment here. Things aren't quite as centered as I want them here in the field of view, but we'll see what we got here on NGC 5053. Should have another about 5 seconds. Oh, of course, if you hit the exposure button, you would have about 5 seconds, and if you don't, well, you're going to be waiting a very long time. All right, so let me, while we're doing that snafu, let me see if we can move it over just a bit. All right, so let's see what we have here very shortly. This is just a 1 second exposure just to see if we can move the stars around. Let's see what we got in 15 seconds here for NGC 5053 live at the Eyepiece. Okay, so yes, we do have it there. We might need a little bit more exposure. Let me see if I can bring it out a little bit more here or not. I think we're going to need to up our exposure on this one just a bit more. In fact, let's do that. So as you can see right off the bat, remember when we were talking about the classifications of globular clusters, this one here looks to be, well, a very high number, you know, like a class 11 or even 10, loose classification for any centralization of stars near the core. Maybe even a 12. I'd have to go ahead and reference it here. But as you can see, there's a lot of different nuances to globular clusters. They certainly all do not look the same. Okay, we're going to double our exposure. We are going to go ahead and go up to 30 seconds here. Because this one's pretty dim. All right, let's go ahead and see what we got here. In about 20 seconds, we are going to have NGC 5053 up on the screen here. So there is our object info. Interesting that it's not clicking off. There we go. It's actually at the bottom. That's interesting. It had it in the same descriptive field. You'll notice here at the bottom of our screen, the faint and loose globular cluster NGC 5053 lies only about 1 degree to the east of M53. You want to take a look to see what it looks like through our system? There it is. Yes, indeed. It is a vastly different globular cluster than the brighter M53. And yes, that is actually even at a 50-second, 30-second exposure. So this one is noticeably fainter. And certainly, I don't see much of a concentration at all towards the center of this particular globular cluster. So here's a good example, and two globular clusters that are very close to one another, M53 and NGC 5053. M53 was brighter. It certainly had more concentration towards the center, but NGC 5053 is very loose indeed, as far as practically no concentration of stars that I can see near the center. Maybe we need more exposure time, but it looks more to me like an open cluster rather than a globular cluster. And it looks like it has a classification. Wait a minute, I just saw it. Yes, class 11. So 12 being the least condensed near the core. NGC 5053 is a class 11. So very, very loose. Not a whole lot of concentration near the core at all. And we could see that visually comparing it to the other globular cluster. And M53, just to cross-reference that, was a class 5. So we'll leave M53 up for a moment. Let you enjoy the view. All right, so let's go ahead and we will move on to our next globular cluster of the evening. This one's going to be nice. This one I really enjoy. We are going to hop on over to M5, which is a globular cluster in serpents. Pretty easy to find as well. Let's take a look. If you were to face to the southwest right now, there is no mistaking that bright object to the southwest. That is the planet Jupiter. And if you go ahead and look, probably again, this is about maybe what, 40 degrees I'm thinking up. All right, 49 degrees up is M5. So again, you find Jupiter. I would say that's probably a good 20 degrees north from Jupiter. Should be able to find, oh, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that one. Wow, look at the name of that star. Let's see if we can find, okay, Serpens there, and if you just scoot over to the west, let's go to M5. Okay, so let's bring in M5 actually into the scope. One moment, and we'll get right there. So say goodbye to NGC 5053, a Class 11 globular cluster. Now I know this one here is going to be much brighter, so we are going to drop our exposure down again to 15 seconds. For M5. So M5 coming up here in about 8 or so more seconds. Let's go back to our view so that we can see our first image of M5. Smack dab right in the middle of our field of view. Love it when a plan comes together. So let's go ahead and adjust this just a bit so that we can try to make out a little bit more detail in the core. There we go. Nice. Very, very nice. So let's do that. And there we go. So there is our image, folks. Our live image of M5. Charles Messier independently rediscovered this one back in 1764. This is located in the constellation Serpens. Again, if you were to face due south, let's go back to our program here. You can see where M5 is in relationship to the bright star, which actually isn't a star at all. That's the mighty planet Jupiter towards the southwest there. And I'm guesstimating that if you look up maybe 10 or 20, probably 20 degrees, you should be able to see M5. And it is probably obvious in a good pair of binoculars from a dark sky. 24,000 light years away. It's at magnitude 5.6. There's our view. This one is a really nice globular cluster to enjoy visually at the eyepiece. I've seen it many, many times visually myself, and it's got to rank up there as one of my favorites. So if you head on out, maybe it'll be one of yours. Now let's just go ahead and look up to see what classification M5 is in the Shapley Sawyer concentration classification system for our globular clusters. And that one is a class 5 globular cluster. So it has what would probably be considered an intermediate concentration of stars near its core. Now, globular clusters are some of the oldest objects in the universe, and these things are basically just a mass of stars. And in fact, they estimate here that M5 in particular, the one that we are viewing right now, has approximately, well, anywhere from 100,000 up to 500,000 stars. I'm sure it's pretty difficult to nail down the actual count to any, real certainty, but astronomers have their ways to get at least that estimation. So we can't go ahead and talk about globular clusters, at least in the northern hemisphere, without talking about the Great Hercules cluster, M13, in the constellation Hercules. So that globular cluster is arguably the best in the northern hemisphere. We will hop one up to Hercules next, right here at the eyepiece. For right now, continue to enjoy the view of M5. Globular cluster in the constellation Serpens, magnitude 5.6, anywhere from 100 to 500,000 stars. wanted to make sure I updated the channel information to reflect the actual objects that we are observing. Of course, tonight is globular clusters. And that should be saved. Good, we got that saved off. I don't know why my declination is just bouncing all over the place right now. But let's go ahead up to visit what many consider to be the best globular cluster in the Northern Hemisphere, M13, the Hercules cluster. Coming up next, right here, live at the Eyepiece. Going to do some quick 1-second exposures. Yeah, I thought that. Let's get our M13 a little bit better centered up. There we go. And that's just a 1-second exposure here. All right, so let's go ahead and get my guiding going on the telescope so that we can make sure that we can get some good stuff. And let's go ahead and start some, let's do a 15-second exposure. I don't think M13 is going to require much, if that. So let's see what we got. All right, so coming up in about, let's say another 10 seconds here. M13. Now, you might have heard me talking about this before. If you were to go outside and look straight up at about 10:30 your local time, almost about overhead, at least to my latitude here from Middle Tennessee, is going to be M13. Look at that. That is a perfect exposure for M13. That came out very well. Maybe make a little bit of a tweak here and there. We'll brighten up just a tad, and we'll let that just run. So again, so if you were to go outside, depending upon your latitude, of course, but just at about what's called the zenith for me, or almost directly overhead, you will find the constellation Hercules. And right in between of Eta Hercules and Zeta Hercules, not quite right in between, but very, very close, is M13, the Great Hercules Cluster. Let's go back to our view, and you can go ahead and read the detail there on the screen. And interesting, it was discovered by Edmund Halley in 1714. He was even able to pick it up with his naked eye. 50 years later, it was added by Charles Messier in 1764. Sir William Herschel, who is amateur astronomer extraordinaire, said it was the most beautiful clusters of stars, exceedingly compressed in the middle and very rich. So let's look up to see what classification the Shapley-Sawyer concentration class of globular clusters M13 is. It is also a class 5. So a class 5 means it has an intermediate concentration of stars near its center. Now, one thing visually I want to see if you can pick out is amateur astronomers, we call it the X. It's an X-shaped grouping of stars in the Hercules cluster. And if anyone can see it, I want you to leave the comments here to the video, please, just to let me know if you were able to see the X shape. I'll give you a hint. It's not quite in the center, but it's maybe around the 2 o'clock position. Very close to the center. Once we are done with this globular cluster, that's going to be a wrap for this live episode of At the Eyepiece. But enjoy the view of M13. This, I can tell you from personal experience, if you have a small pair of 7x50 binoculars, even from a moderately light polluted area, I can easily spot M13 as a fuzzy patch. It's also great, being that it's almost directly overhead. You're looking through less of the atmosphere, you're looking through less light pollution, so those contribute to being able to pick it up visually even more so than some of the other globular clusters that we saw earlier, because those are going to be much lower towards the horizon and probably looking, you know, if you're in a light polluted area, probably looking through more light pollution. So this one is definitely one to get out and get at the eyepiece of your own binoculars, small telescope, large telescope, whatever it is you may use, because this one is a beauty. Let's go back to our chart just to make sure everybody knows whereabouts we are looking. So I have the red Telrad finder kind of overlaid on top of our scope where it's pointed at. As you can see, zenith there marks directly overhead for where you are, and therefore where I'm at too. And Hercules is the constellation right above us. And if we zoom in here, we can see just about where the Hercules cluster is in relationship to the keystone shape of the Hercules cluster there. Pretty much between Zeta Hercules and Eta Hercules. A little bit closer to Eta, as you can see. So in our Sky Safari Planetarium program, we only have, of course, stars and globular clusters visible. So you can see the names of the constellations, and you can see some other NGC objects, also some Messier objects, M10, M12. Those are all globular clusters in our sky. Now, we're not going to have the opportunity this evening to go through and do all of them, but we are going to go ahead and wrap it up here on M13. Just a beautiful shot. So I want to point out, we do live episodes here at the Eyepiece. We aren't doing astrophotography. We are doing electronically assisted astronomy. You might also hear electronically assisted observing. You may have also heard video astronomy. It's kind of evolved from video astronomy up into probably the more popular now, I think, electronically assisted astronomy or electronically assisted observing. So if you enjoy this, please feel free. I want you to hit that bell, subscribe to the At the Eyepiece channel. We try to go ahead and bring all things related to the amateur astronomer, from the podcast to these types of live episodes to our observing alert previously that we did there for, what was that, Comet 2013 S3 Pan-STARRS. Getting some good updates from that one. No, myself, I have not observed that comet yet as well. My northern sky is just the absolute worst for me as far as light pollution goes. So it might wait till I'm out in a dark sky site, but I would sure love to hear about anyone else who was able to view Comet Pan-STARRS. It should be brightest probably next month as it rounds the sun. So just kind of keep that in mind. So I want to thank everybody for watching. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, please. If you want to follow the blog, just head on over to attheeyepiece.org. You can find out some information there. If you want to listen to the podcast, it is simultaneously streamed here on YouTube. But if you just want to get the audio portion, you can listen to that in a couple of different ways. One, head on over to my hosting site, Spreaker.com, and you can go ahead and follow the At the Eyepiece show right there. In addition, if you are on the blog site, you will have the ability to listen to the podcast right there. Just look for the title page. I believe it just says listen live to the At the Eyepiece show, and you can listen to the latest episodes right from the blog site as well. We are trying to get our iTunes thing worked out again for our new hosting site, Spreaker, so hopefully we will be back on YouTube, back on iTunes, so that you can go ahead and subscribe that way if you prefer iTunes. But anyway, I sure hope you enjoyed the globular clusters that we were able to view tonight, the different classifications. Hopefully you came away learning something. Hopefully you came away with more appreciation for what's up in the night sky, because the night sky is always putting on a show, and the price of admission is simply your curiosity. So keep looking up and keep coming right back here at the Eyepiece. Thanks for watching.